A very good morning to you. It really sounds pretty impressive, doesn't it? How do we get to that point? How do we achieve that success?
Thank you so much for having us. Good morning. Good morning to yourself and to everyone watching. Just to firstly acknowledge, it's not just ourselves. There was a group of economists, a group of tank leaders, thought leaders who were part of the process, who I just want to acknowledge, with whom we worked and together with M-Plan convener, Prof. Madonsela. But just in terms of your question, how do we do this? I think we have really said we need to do a reboot nationally from an economic perspective in terms of planning, in terms of what we deem to be outcomes. And we really need to rewire ourselves in terms of how we are going to get there. What do we say and how do we get there? Let's use industrial policies, number one, to expand agricultural and industrial production. We've seen in various countries, particularly here on the continent, various countries are growing between 6 to 8% growth. Other newly industrialized countries grew very fast, particularly in the last 30 years. And how do they do it? They used agricultural and industrial production extensively. Policies must be reviewed, and we have to target a doubling of our manufacturing output. This requires a revisiting and a review of your trade, your fiscal, and your monetary policies. We've measured this in this report, how the implementation of some of our recommendations are going to affect key household aggregate demand, final consumption, government expenditure, together with your trade numbers and FDI. And we're very clear to see that if we don't have labor absorptive strategies, particularly in our economic sectors, we won't be able to absorb in the main the large unemployed South Africans in the labor market. So as an additional, what we call a necessary fundamental, we have underpinned that with labor absorptive policies. One, youth conscription. Two, expansion of EPWP. And three, you have to have localized community works programs. We prefer full employment being targeted in retrospect, rather than looking at more reliance on the state. And I think this will boost our aggregate household demand. This will boost our economic activity and consumption at a local level. There's various range of policies that drive investment-led growth to expand aggregate demand and infrastructure delivery, together with driving outwards international trade and regional, particularly regional and continental trade.
Okay, so let me just jump in here. I mean, this requires a massive paradigm shift, doesn't it? Because so many of our policies are looking back, still, reliant on past thought leaders. How do we change that? How do we get to this new vision?
So I love that question because it requires a shift in the way we plan. It requires a shift in our leadership. It requires a shift in our thinking. The reason why the report is called New Wine into New Wine Skins is that we're saying, listen, we have to be innovative. We've got so many ideas in this report that we have put inside the report. What we do is assess from 7 strategic interventions. We've done, number one, a status quo assessment, what we call a diagnostic assessment of about 17 variables that are key drivers of our economy that we unpack to look at. And the result we see over time is that we actually cannot, with both NDP if you look backwards, we've looked at the average growth rate against the targeted outcomes, and we have never met 5.5%, between 5.4 and 5.1% growth. We have always been between 1.2 and 3.5. At most, it was 3.5 of average growth over a 4-5-year period over the last 25 years. And this requires a revisiting and a review of the inadequate policies. It's not just an issue of implementation that we argue. We say that we haven't gotten the correct economic planning instruments in place. And I think what we also argue is that we need a bold and decisive economic strategy. It can be done. Countries have revisited economic policies and revisited policy instruments to try and see what outcomes will they generate. And I think we must be very sober-minded and agree that as South Africa, the outcomes that we have implemented from a neoliberal economic view have not yielded outcomes, whether it's from investment, business confidence, economic activity, and most importantly, unemployment, poverty, and inequality. And we see this before COVID. So COVID has simply accentuated the worsening of our structural inefficiencies and flaws. Some are many are historically inherited, but we need to change the structure of our economy. We can do this, and I think that what we need to review is seriously the structure of our economy and try and change it. And we're not all talking the same things when we talk structure.
Okay, so let me jump in there quickly. You talk about funding socio-economic inclusion and fostering civic responsibility. You know, sadly, in this time of COVID, we've seen just the opposite there. We've seen extraordinary greed and a sort of brutal greed that has been very dangerous to our society. So again, we need to do a massive shift there, don't we? We have to change our focus to make it more sustainable as well, and giving back to the community to pull everybody up.
Singapore is a brilliant example of how they changed the functioning of the state. The state, for us, if you see consumption driven downwards, if you see net exports coming down, if you see a slump in your FDI, your investment to capital inflows, you only rely, particularly in a time of shock, on your government expenditure to boost your stimulus, to boost economic activity. And that's why we have to drive expansionary fiscal policy. But the problem is there's severe leakage, there's inefficiency in the state, and you have to therefore focus on state capacity and ensure that from a local level all the way up to your national departments and presidency, in all of those facets, there's coordination, there's synergies, there's a working together by all of these departments. We do focus in the chapter on capacity of the state. We cannot run away from that. And I think that we have said decisively in the report that we have to have meritocracy. We've said that we need to have a new breed of thinkers coming in, and a type of thinking that is different in terms of solving the problems, in terms of the system of government and how government plans around itself, works together and coordinates all of its interventions. South Africa doesn't have a problem of financing policy interventions. We have spent billions over the last few years across industrial incentives and agricultural incentives, as an example, but we have not seen outcomes. We are deindustrializing. Our agricultural productivity is on a downward trajectory. Its contribution to economic output and employment is going downwards, and revising, it's lower than 5% economic output contribution to GDP. And this means that simply we are not yielding outcomes. So the revisioning means the policies in agriculture need to be reviewed. We've specifically focused on rural development and agriculture as a subsector, industrial activity, industrial production as a subsector in that report, primarily because of their ability to kickstart growth, of their ability to also accelerate the rate of growth. And we've seen that across the world, that if you don't focus on manufacturing and you don't focus on your agricultural productivity, even if you have a high export value and you export high value goods, you will not be able to absorb the masses of your unemployed. So there has to be a reshifting.
We are going to have to leave it there, but I must say, I love speaking to people like you. There are not enough of you around. I wish there were. I feel positive. I feel good. I feel that we can actually do something. Let's stop looking back. Let's start looking forward. Very good to have you with us this morning. Thank you.